Hello and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Luke Plimmer.
And I'm John O'Neill.
Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves and the times when they've died on stage.
Our Backstage Pass feature takes us behind the scenes at the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham, to discover more about what goes into making a great amateur production. This month's episode focuses on John Webster's Jacobean tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi. We'll be talking to actor, director and writer Andrew Cowie about his life and loves in amateur theatre, his approach to directing The Duchess of Malfi, and finding out about the unique and bloodthirsty genre that is Jacobean revenge tragedy.
Meanwhile, Liz has been behind the scenes of The Duchess of Malfi to talk to lighting designer Charlotte Robinson about the challenges and rewards of lighting this darkest of plays.
For this episode's feature interview, I'm pleased to say we are joined by none other than Mr. Andrew Cowie. Welcome, Andrew, to our podcast.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Andrew, we have you here for two reasons today. The first is your lifetime of dedication to and unending experience of theatre. And the second is your current involvement in staging the Jacobean revenge tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi. To introduce you to our listeners, you joined the Crescent in 1981, the year after I was born, over 40 years ago, to play a role in that year's production of Treasure Island. You act, direct, write and translate, so there's plenty for us to talk about. But first, you're currently in rehearsals directing The Duchess of Malfi, and before we talk specifically about that play, I'd like to have a stab at explaining the revenge tragedy to our listeners, as The Duchess of Malfi is a Jacobean revenge tragedy, a theatrical genre all of its own.
So, Andrew, what can audiences expect from revenge tragedies?
The thing, there's a set of sort of staging conventions that you get with revenge tragedies. There are deceptions, there are gory deaths. Quite often there'll be some kind of staged ghoulish scene. So in the Revenger's tragedy, Vindice has Gloriana's skull and under cover of darkness presents this to her. It is Lucerio. So so it's the darker side of human nature. That's what it's exploring.
And do you think, is it entirely serious, or is there a sort of a black comedy about it?
I think any kind of drama where there is tension, there are moments of release from that tension. But we're not camping it up. We're not playing it for laughs. Yeah. We're playing it straight.
For people who aren't familiar with revenge tragedies or Jacobean theatre, they will know the most famous revenge tragedy, which is actually Hamlet.
Yeah, you see, this is why I know. Strictly speaking, if you Google Duchess of Malfi revenge tragedy,
well, that's exactly what I did.
Strictly speaking, that's what it is. But you're right. I would say a classical revenge tragedy would be something like Hamlet. So an offence occurred before the action of the play began. Your protagonist will then, in Act 1, find out about this. They will spend the play pursuing their revenge, and in end of Act 5, they've completed it. So it happens in Hamlet, happens in the Revenger's tragedy. That isn't, strictly speaking, what happens in the Duchess of Malfi. Somebody has died, but she's not revenging that. So for me, in terms of directing it and giving some kind of shape to it, for me it's more that she makes a tragic mistake. So I think in plot terms...
And she is the lead character. She's the heroine of the piece.
Exactly.
What's her name again?
We don't know.
Oh, nice.
Just the Duchess.
Of the three siblings, we only know the name of one of them. It's Ferdinand. So the Cardinal is only ever the Cardinal. The Duchess is only ever the Duchess. But so in something like King Lear, he makes a fatal mistake. He divides the kingdom. And if you'd been there to say, I really don't think that's a great idea, and he might have said, oh, OK, fair enough, I won't do it, and you wouldn't have a play. And something like Richard II, he banishes Bolingbroke, and if you'd been there to say, it's really not a great idea. If you'd taken that on board and said, "Oh, well, I won't do it then," you wouldn't have a play.
Yeah.
So what she does wrong in this one is she marries in secret and keeps it from her brothers. So if you've been able to say, yeah, don't marry him, or yeah, marry him, but you're going to have that conversation with your brothers, then the tragedy would have been averted. Whereas in Hamlet, his father was murdered. I mean, nothing's going to, within the context of the play, you can't put that right. So I think it's
Hamlet didn't do the murder, but the
correct.
Duchess.
He's going to spend the whole time avenging it. So there are various revengey themes throughout the Duchess of Malfi, but that idea of your protagonist is pursuing their vengeance throughout the course of the play, she doesn't do that.
No. And in fact, it's her elder brother
It's the elder brother, yes, and then
pursuing the vengeance.
Yeah, and then all sorts of terrible things happen. So by the end, all the men, they're all having vengeance on everyone else. Sure. And also, she dies in Act 4. So normally, if the point of the drama is to play out this revenge plot, Act 1 they find out what they've got to revenge, Act 5 they've done it, end of play. Well, she doesn't. She's gone by Act 4. Yeah. So then we see all these other plots being played out amongst all the male characters.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to hear it in context with other plays that you've gone over and the other plots within the other plays and how they're slightly different.
We keep spotting all these connections with all the Shakespeare plays, particularly Hamlet. I mean, there's a bit where Antonio comes in and he sees the cardinal, who's one of the brothers, and it's Hamlet discovering Claudius. And the cardinal is praying, and he almost has the same line. Now might I do it, Pat? Now while he's praying, and for exactly the same reason that Hamlet doesn't murder Claudius at that point, Antonio decides not to murder the cardinal because he said, "Yeah, but he's praying, isn't he? So that means he'll go straight to heaven."
It's true.
So I better hadn't do that then.
Yeah. And which came first, the Revenger's Tragedy or Hamlet? Hamlet.
Yeah.
So you think that Webster lifted bits from Hamlet?
Well,
as a tribute or as a copy?
I don't know. I think clearly Shakespeare was an influence on everybody
ever since.
And he was very successful. And you think, oh well, that worked for him. We'll do a bit of that then. So yeah, I think he was a profound influence. But also they were also then being influenced by the similar sources.
Yeah.
And the revenge tragedy, it's still alive today in films. I mean, I think.
Well,
you get a lot of films where there's a lot of people dead at the end. It's all revenge.
Yes, and this is in terms of plot and playing style, because there's lots of thoroughly unpleasant people in this, and sometimes the actors just want to play bad guys because it's fun to play the bad guy. Yeah. But if you've seen Succession, everybody is vile in Succession. But
that's a HBO drama at the moment, isn't it?
So, but they're hugely entertaining, and you're sort of kind of
very witty.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that. Everybody's got an agenda. So that idea of how do I motivate my lead character to commit mayhem and murder? Oh well, I'll make it. Well, they're avenging somebody they love. So sort of Kill Bill and all those kind of things.
Yeah. And I suppose that makes them credible in the eyes of the audience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just think, well,
this is just a vile person.
Silly.
Yeah. But if you've got a little 10-minute scene at the beginning where their loved one died, you think, oh well, fair enough. All bets are off.
Set up the motivation.
Exactly. You just kill everybody you like.
Revenge tragedies often contain ghosts and the supernatural.
Yep. Got
murder.
That. Yep.
Insanity and madness scenes.
Got that.
Always fun to play.
Yep.
A character seeking revenge.
Yep.
A clear villain.
Yep.
On-stage violence.
Yes.
And that makes it different to previous revenge tragedies that were prior to the Elizabethan age, where the violence was off-stage. Am I right in saying that?
The ancient Greeks, it was always a messenger coming on saying, "Oh, you'll never guess what, this awful thing has just happened." I think there are various accounts of how Elizabethan Jacobean tragedies dramas were staged. We don't have an authoritative source of somebody who actually went to see a play and said, "Well, this is exactly what I saw, and this is how they did it." But they were starting to use stage effects, particularly when they moved to the indoor theatres, which because Malfi was performed outdoors at the Globe and then also performed indoors at the Blackfriars Theatre. So you can have lighting effects. So it's the first time in the dialogue, it actually says, take hence the lights, because you could do that, because it was indoors, they can take the lights away. You can't do that if you're performing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the Globe. So they were starting to use more stage effects and make things more gruesome.
And there's often, or usually, sensational, blood-filled conclusions.
Yep.
And you're having to grapple with these conventions. And you say you're presenting these straight. You don't want the audience to laugh.
Yeah. No, you shouldn't.
But how are you? I mean, when it comes to an actual death, the technique of actually doing the death and the stabbing on stage, how are you getting the actor to perform that act?
We got a stage combat person in, Kaz Luckins, who was brilliant, and she directed them just as if you were doing a contemporary film drama. There were ways in which you do it. There's a balance of what you do to me, what I do in return, and the victim has to sell the injury. You can't have the murderer just doing lots of stabby stuff if I'm just sort of standing there. Oh, it hurts. So she's staged these scenes as if it were a contemporary drama, and people are actually being.
So the violence should look and feel very real.
Yeah, I mean, it's stylised to the extent that we have some beautiful costumes. Yes. So we haven't got blood bags or anything like that. So I was in King Lear at the Crescent a few years ago, and I was Gloucester, and I don't know if you know the play, but his eyes are gouged out, and we spent ages. You see, so you laughed. You see, people laugh, and we spent ages working out how you do this. Well, we came up with something that was really graphic, and we thought, oh, this is outrageous. They're going to laugh when we do this. But they didn't.
How did you do
really
it?
Didn't. You get, obviously, I'm going to mime with my hands, which will mean nothing on the recording. But the guy who was doing the gouging held a blood bag in his left hand and held that over my eye. He then got a spoon.
And the blood bag, is that just a plastic bag?
A plastic bag full of
squeeze it and it opens.
Exactly.
Right.
So he then had a spoon.
Yeah.
So we thought, that's good. Just the picture that conjures up. He's going to scoop out Gloucester's eyes with a spoon. Oh my God! But he could then push hard on his own hand and really go for it. And I'm sort of sitting
so
there
you're
going,
lying on the floor, the other actor's on top of you.
Exactly.
He's got the blood bag in his hand, which is over your eye, and then he plunges a spoon into his fist.
Exactly. And then grinds away, and then when he thinks we've gone far enough with it, he just squeezed the blood bag, and it went everywhere. Wow.
So sounds horrendous.
It was, but it was fabulous. But we could do that because it's a white shirt. Make sure that it was appropriately dressed. White shirt, just have a different white shirt every time. Yeah. Well, the things we've got for this, they are exquisite period costumes. Yeah. We are not going to just. We're not going to chuck those in the washing machine every night. That is not going to.
So you're setting it in the 1500s, isn't it?
No, we're setting it. Well, what Webster did. It's always, for me. It's always a matter of trying to work out what was the playwright trying to do then. How, therefore, do we do now what they were doing then? So there was this book called The Palace of Pleasures, which was a collection of mostly Italian stories, some of which were fictional and some of which were factual. And the belief is that there really was a Duchess of Malfi. And that story was set about 100 years before Webster wrote Malfi.
Right.
And it's in Italy, and it was the period of the tension between Catholics and Anglicans. So I thought, well, that's what he did. He set it in Italy. He set it 100 years ago. Right. So that's what we'll do then.
Right.
So it's sort of fascist.
Sure.
Okay.
20s,
so you've gone to the 1920s.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's the reason thing. So what did he do then? So how do we do that now? Because this is the thing with period dress. I think when it was first staged, they weren't in period dress. They were in modern dress. There wasn't this whole idea of researching the period and having authentic props and costumes and so on. That was a 19th century thing. Nobody did that before. So it can be nice. And the Globe production, I mean, it looks sensational. That's all period stuff. But it's not what Webster did.
Yeah. So Webster distanced the action from the audience by 100 years, which was reasonably contemporary to that audience. And you've done the same.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Interesting.
So it's thought that the Duchess of Malfi was performed in 1613 or 1614, and the playwright Webster sets the drama in Italy in the early 16th century. It's considered among the great tragedies of English Renaissance drama. So what do you think that is? What draws you to it?
In terms of why is it relevant now, it's about corruption in high places. It was during the reign of James I, who was considered then and is now considered to have been, given that he followed on from Elizabeth I, and it was Gloriana and it was the Virgin Queen and everybody loved Elizabeth, there was a sense that there was a corruption spreading through the court, and it started with James. And the play is about that. So the reason why Webster had to set it abroad, why he had to set it in the past, was that it's a metaphor for James I's court, and this endemic corruption throughout. So if he'd made it explicit, the censors would have shut it down.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what people's politics are, but if you feel there might be an issue with corruption in high political places, here's a play that talks about precisely that. Precisely that.
And I read the play in preparation for our chat, and I'm glad I did actually, because it prompted me to delve into Jacobean drama for the first time since my A-levels, when I read The Revenger's Tragedy back then.
I did that in my A-levels.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it back then. And the character I was confused by and didn't know how, if I was cast, I would go about playing is, as an actor, is that of, I might pronounce this wrong, Bossola?
Bossola, yeah.
Bossola.
We're going for Bossola.
Because he has a lot of stage time.
He does.
And he's quite crucial to driving the plot forward, but he's something of a mystery. So can you tell us about him a little bit and the advice you've given to the actor playing him?
Yeah, he's got the longest and most contrasty emotional journey in the whole thing. So he starts off, he does feel he's been badly treated by the Cardinal. He served a prison sentence. We don't know what for. The other characters in the play think that he did commit a crime, but at nowhere is it explicit that he did. But he's taken the rap for something on behalf of the Cardinal. So initially he is resentful of the way in which he's been treated. He accepts this job to go and be embedded in the Duchess's household and spy on her. And he follows to the letter everything he's been asked to do. But in the process of getting to know the Duchess, he realises that she's genuinely a good woman, and that in carrying out the brother's orders, he's done something that he simply can't forgive himself for having done. So then he has a kind of moral epiphany, and then the second half of the play he's trying to redeem himself. So it's playing all of that, but it's in terms of, because with all the actors, I always say to people, if you know how your character ends up at the end of the play, start as far from that as you can get, and then you play the transition towards it.
They call it an arc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with Bossola, it's pretty clear that he starts miles away from where he ends. So the fact that there is complexity, and you think, I wonder how that actor's going to play that. You think, well, that's why it's an interesting part to play.
Because there's points in the play where he's saying one thing but then doing another for a while, isn't he?
And all the way through, people are concocting stories, and that's a real feature of revenge tragedies. The things that I can confide in you because you're in on this, but I mustn't tell you because if you find out, that it blows the whole thing out the water. So there's lots of concocting of stories and deception and double dealing going on.
So I think the fact that the Duchess of Malfi is written in a Jacobean language, and the fact that that play is hundreds of years old, some people might feel a bit, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but intimidated by that sort of language. How do you think you can reassure any listeners about that?
The example I used, I don't know if it was a particularly helpful one, but in my youth there was a kids' TV show called The Clangers, and they speak with a swanny whistle going. So they have no words whatsoever, but you know what they're saying just from the inflection. So I think
tone,
if the Clangers can do it with a
and the rhythm
with a whistle,
Yeah.
You can do it with actual real words. It is a clearer, I hope it is a clearer text. It's an extremely strong cast.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time just going through literally line by line by line, just working out, so what do they mean then?
Yeah.
So as you were saying, I'm saying that to you, but I don't mean that. Or this is a bit where, yes, I absolutely mean what I'm saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we spent a lot of time on making sure they know exactly what's going on.
Thank you, Andrew. So the Duchess of Malfi opens in the Crescent Theatre studio on Saturday, November the 12th, and runs until Saturday the 19th. So get your tickets now.
So, Andrew, there is, of course, much more to you than your current project, but where did it all begin? What was the first theatrical love of your life?
The first thing, I suppose I must have been in a nativity play or something in an infant school, but the first sort of character that I remember playing was in junior school, and we did Brer Rabbit meets Brer Lion. Now, I don't think in schools you do the Brer Rabbit stories anymore. No,
We don't talk about that one, apparently. Yeah.
This was the 60s, and we did. But I was the lion, and I was tied up in the briar bush or whatever I was doing. And I thought, well, I'm a lion, and I'm tied up, so what would a lion do? Well, I'd growl, wouldn't I? So I growled, and I stood there for however long it took, growling all the way through, and I gave myself a terribly sore throat. But taking it really seriously. And the other thing that I remember vividly was it was in the school assembly hall. So normally, I don't know, you might play sports in there or you have assembly in there, but you put some rostra in and you put curtains around it and you've created this magical space. And it was so exciting. I remember that, making an entrance, and I still feel it now, stepping from off stage, where we can sort of around, have a little chat, and then you step on stage, and that change, and just finding that so exciting.
Yeah.
So that was.
And even when you stood in the wings, that's not the on space, that's the off space.
Exactly. Yeah.
As soon as you are, and even when an audience isn't there,
I know.
you stand
still
on
feel
that
it.
stage and you look out, and there's a feeling.
Yeah, and that's the first time I remember that feeling, and thinking how magical and how exciting that was. Yeah.
Was there a love in your theatrical life that's been even more significant or that stood out to you?
Yeah, the highlight, I mean, it still is. The highlight for me was playing Hamlet here at the Crescent Theatre in 1989.
Wow.
And it was one of those things, because you can still read people, even people who've played it, say, oh, it's this huge intellectual challenge. What does he do? Why doesn't he kill Claudius? All that kind of stuff. And I wanted to go for it. And Michael Barry, who directed it most recently, directed that one. And
He did it in '89 as well?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Same director. And I went to see Mark Rylance play it at the RSC.
Recently?
No, this was in 1989,
Right.
1988. And when I was thinking, well, I sort of intellectually, I think I can work out how to do it, but I don't know if I could do it. And watching Mark Rylance, which, like we were just saying, if the actors understand what they're doing, the audience understood it. And it was absolutely crystal clear. All these things people agonise about, well, does he love Ophelia or doesn't he? The Mark Rylance one, of course he loves Ophelia. And he's desperate to keep her safe from this awful thing he's got to do. So having seen that, I was desperate to do it. I didn't audition that well, and Michael did say. But I remember, and I've never done this before, I waited till afterwards, and I said, look, I know I didn't do terribly well, but I know I can do this. And there was something about my conviction that made him think, okay, I'll give him a chance. And normally, here, when you audition for something, you fill in this form and you say, would you be prepared to consider any other role? And of course, the correct form is, well, of course I would. And it was the only time I've ever said, no. I don't want to be in a room and watch somebody do it wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't write.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
but
be in a room
that,
watch it. But I knew how to do it. And it turned out very well. And we did 2-week runs in those days. So just to live in that world every night.
And was it main house or studio?
Main house.
And was it like full scenery production or?
Yeah. It was a big show. So then, having learnt this thing and really grieving that it was over, It broke my heart. I thought, I'm never going to do this again. So I thought maybe I could do a sort of school show. I could just put the big speeches together and maybe talk around it. And I worked on that, and eventually I came up with a 1 hour, one-man version of Hamlet.
Right.
Which I then did at the Edinburgh Fringe, and the first time I'd ever gone to the Edinburgh Fringe, and did really well there.
Fantastic.
I then toured it around the schools. I got my equity card.
Wow.
Playing.
So it was a real springboard for you then.
Yeah. And then having done Edinburgh once, thinking, well, I want to go again. So then started writing plays, which I'd never done before. But it all started with that show. It genuinely changed my life. It was wonderful.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
So this is the last question, and it's very apt for revenge tragedy. Can you tell us about a time that you've died on stage?
Well, I can. It was in the Duchess of Malfi
Okay.
when I was a student. Because I was saying, it was the 70s, it was university drama department started to explore these, and then it was sort of picked up in the 90s. So I went to university at Lancaster, and the drama department was run by Margaret Eddershaw and Keith Sturgis, who they were just our tutors at the time, but if you Google those names, they've published books on rediscovering classics and so on. And they did this double bill. We did The Tempest and the Duchess of Malfi, and they created a sort of reproduction, Elizabethan stroke Jacobean backdrop. So I played the Cardinal in Duchess of Malfi, and I was only 19.
He's the evil one.
He's the evil. And I was only 19 or 20, and I was a very wet behind the ears 19 or 20-year-old. And so we've got this backcloth, and we'll have candelabras, because they had candelabras, and we'll make them out of wood, because who knows, that's probably what they did, and we'll put real candles on these wooden candelabras.
Okay.
What we'll then do is we'll hoist them up next to, this is pre-LED lighting, which is cold. We'll put them right next to these intensely hot electric lanterns, which then inevitably melted the wax spread along the wooden candelabras and set fire to them.
And what was above them when they set fire? What?
Sorry?
You're telling us to... No, carry on. I'm going ahead.
So I was on stage with Ferdinand, who was my brother, in the play, and I could tell there was a little sort of frisson amongst the audience, a little murmur, and I could see Ferdinand sort of glancing above my head. I thought, well, I think I'm doing it right. I think I've got all the right lines. So I thought, I'll just have a little wander around the stage, and looked up oh my God. And it was flaming, the wax was on fire, and as it was falling down. And from the front, it looked like it was landing on my head, and I was just being a trooper and carrying on. So we thought, okay, right, so now everybody in the room knows the set is on fire. But we didn't know enough to make a choice, so that, well, we better carry on acting then. And then one of the theatre porters, because the way it was suspended was there was a cable went up to the grid, and then it was tied off on the wall. So the porter came on, untied it at the side, and started lowering it down. So now this flaming candelabra is dropping down towards stage level. So at this point we think it's probably safe to stop now. So he comes on with his fire extinguisher, one of those very loud CO2 noise, puts the whole thing out. So we get a nice little sort of murmur and think, okay, well, we better start again. But no, now it's going back up again. So we had that.
That's a pretty good one.
Well, it was.
And they're pretty lucky that there was nothing above that candelabra.
Exactly, and that neither of us did actually walk under it, because it would have been very badly burnt. But yes, that was my near-death experience playing.
Well, there you go.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on our
absolute delight.
Humble little podcast.
Yes.
Okay. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much.
I was just getting to my stride. I was enjoying that. Thank you.
We implore everyone to go and see The Duchess of Malfi, which is on, as we said, from the 12th to the 19th of November. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we hand over to Liz, who's been behind the scenes on The Duchess of Malfi, to find out more about lighting a Jacobean tragedy.
Okay, so I am delighted to be joined by lighting and event technician Charlotte Robinson. Hi, Charlotte.
Hello.
Charlotte is lighting, or designing the lighting, I should say, for the Crescent Theatre's forthcoming production of The Duchess of Malfi. So we're going to chat a bit about that and a bit about lighting in general. So I thought I'd start with the beginning. What's your starting point for designing the lighting for a theatrical production?
So I'd probably start off by reading the script. I'd also talk to the director and try and find out what they want to do, what direction they are thinking of taking the play in, and then from there, kind of, I'd work out the key points of lighting, or most of the key points on the play mirror the key points in lighting. So there's always something going on in terms of lighting.
And when you're designing, so I'm not a lighting person, as will become apparent in our conversation, do you start by thinking about what it's going to look like for the audience? That's where I would come from. I'm mainly a director and an actor. Or do you think about which physical lights you're going to put on the grid?
Personally, I try not to think about anything practical until I have some ideas down. I find that if I start trying to think about practicalities, I think, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to achieve it with this way, then that always kind of leads you down a path of kind of saying, oh, this might be a little bit hard and there's this easier option. So I try and pretend that I don't know anything about lighting at all in terms of the physical practicality, technical side of lighting when I'm starting the design. And then as a process, I find it's very iterative, that I work from very much broad brushstrokes. Kind of, the director will say, this is a dark play, or this is a light play, or this is a happy play, it's a comedy, and then kind of iterate that right down into what do I want it to look like on stage, where's the light going to come from, and then how am I going to, what lighting instruments am I going to use to create that light. And I try to think about colours, and I try to think about gobos. So a gobo is something that shapes the light. Before I start thinking about how I'm going to achieve anything, and once it's all down and I've kind of set out what I want to achieve, that's when I start moving over to a technical process of
That's the bit
this
I'd
is how
never
I'm going
get
to.
I could do the first bit. Then when it came down to how are you going to achieve it, that's where I need help. So you mentioned something there about whether the director says this is a light play or a comedy or a dark play. I think it's fair to say the Duchess of Malfi is a very dark play, both literally and morally. How has that influenced your choices in designing the lighting for it?
So I want to kind of have a foreshadowing of that darkness. So I really tried and bring kind of texture into all of my lighting designs. I really like playing with shadows. I don't want it to be a constant even wash. If you spend any time looking around, just in general in everyday life, you don't get a nice even wash. Even if you're kind of in the middle of an open field. But because of the darkness, I want to bring shadows into that and really accentuate what I'm doing with the texture. And I want to, I want to make sure that there's lots of differences in between the light scenes and the dark scenes. And I want to kind of plunge people into darkness kind of quite quickly. I want it to be quite disorientating to the audience. I don't want them to be, nice, smooth transitions into darkness. It is all very well, but if you can kind of plunge them into darkness quite quickly and completely change the lighting state, and they're quite confused, obviously, the human eye takes a while to react. I also did a play. I did a film at the beginning of the year, and the director of photography did some really interesting things with lighting. So I was the desk op, so my responsibility was to turn the lights on and off, but not necessarily to have any kind of artistic influence over them. And what she did was this amazing kind of thing where she had lots and lots of lights, and they were all in very interesting primary colours. So lots of reds and greens and blues and yellows. And and by having these lights in these amazing primary colours, but at a really dim level, that kind of lifted all of the darkness in the background all of the time, and instead of just being darkness, it became this amazing murky darkness, and that's something that I'm really trying to emulate, and I want to use the play as a kind of a place to experiment a little bit and see if this would work in real life with the human eye. Obviously, cameras and eyes see things in a slightly different way, so it's just a case of seeing what happens, and during the technical periods, that's something that we can really play with and see if it makes something work, or whether it's just going to look slightly weird. So that's something I'm going to try
interesting.
playing with.
You've touched on it there, that you work in other media and other types of live events. So how is theatre lighting different to, say, lighting live events or TV or film?
I think there's two major differences. So the first difference is around whether there's a narrative or not. So a lot of what I do is that as a technician is not at all, doesn't have a narrative. So for example, I've lit a lot of conferences and I've done some kind of sports broadcasts. There isn't really a narrative. The lighting is there to kind of just illuminate the people in the space. You know, the other side of the coin is kind of film and theatre, which has a narrative, and the lighting either fits into the narrative or it drives the narrative. And then live music is somewhere in the middle of those two. You know, maybe it's not an entire narrative, but it's definitely kind of picking up on the themes of the music and the general kind of mood of the music.
I guess some artists do want to sort of tell a story through the set within a concert, for example.
Yes,
like
definitely.
They might have, you know, depends how much of a back catalogue they've got as well, obviously, but they might be trying to shape it in a particular way. So there kind of is a story, sort of.
Yes, definitely. And even if there isn't an entire story, there's like a mood. So there's obviously, you know, you've got songs that maybe are quite a slow ballad. You would like differently to kind of a high-paced rock song.
Which scene or part of the play are you most looking forward to lighting?
It's definitely the darkness scene. So as I said before about this technique of like lots of primary colours that are very, very dim, I'm really excited to try that out and see what that looks like. I mean, it might be terrible, or it might be amazing. It's worth saying that, you know, cameras perceive light in a completely different way to the human eye. Without wanting to get too technical, you know, lighting for camera is a different skill set.
Yeah.
So taking a technique that works really well for cameras and applying that to kind of a theatre context where we're expecting people to see it with their eyes might not necessarily work, but obviously I'm really excited to give that a go and see if it will work. I'm also quite excited about the outside scenes. I really enjoy kind of trying to really emulate like the sun and outside. It's something that I've done quite a lot of, and I just really enjoy it. It can be an absolutely amazing kind of experience, and you know, seeing how similar you can make it is kind of a little challenge that I like to have every time I light a play.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, in terms of like lighting stuff in washers, in real life, like interiors, you never get that evenness of light, but the same outside, even on a really sunny day, it doesn't look the same as if you just whacked everything on a straw gel and general cover across the whole stage. That wouldn't really be like being outside on a summer's day. We might have covered some of this, but what do you particularly enjoy about designing lighting for theatre?
I think it's world building, really. I mean, if you think about real life, you know, light has such a massive influence on people in general. You know, it's if you go outside and you have if it's horrible and dark, that's a different experience to if it's bright and sunny. Like, you know, if you go on a hike or something and it's bright and sunny, then it's, you know. So lighting shapes our world, and that is very much, you know, echoed across in theatre. Like, you know, lighting shapes the world that the people inhabit. You know, obviously all the other technical side of theatre. And it's obviously, you know, it changes a lot of the motivation of the characters, and if you think about the Malfi, you know, Duchess of Malfi specifically, it's, you know, a lot of the scenes where it's really dark wouldn't make any sense if it was light. You know, having a general darkness across the set and across the stage, and then having the points of light with the candles, is, you know, something that's really going to kind of, you know, it that wouldn't work if it was all in kind of a broad kind of daylight, I suppose. I think as well, it's what I really like about lighting in general is the mix of kind of artistic and technical skills that I don't think is really there in many other, you know, aspects of life. You know, we can start thinking about a script, and, you know, then we kind of, you know, at one end of the spectrum, you know, we think about scripts and moods and feelings, and then, you know, in a different part of the design process, you're working out, you know, your cabling routes and you know, everything.
Yeah.
You know, obviously those are the two extremes, and a lot of lighting happens in the middle.
It's like a real left brain, right brain.
It is, yeah.
Working together to achieve the.
It's. I really enjoy that kind of, you know, it's using technical skills to solve artistic questions, I suppose.
Yeah. Which
is good, and it's also very fast paced, because even if you know, I think about the Duchess of Malfi, and, you know, I suppose for context, we've just had the progress meeting, and I have an image in my head of every scene and every time that, you know, every major lighting change and a lot of minor lighting changes as well. But that, no matter what's in my head, and even if, you know, you get thousands of pounds worth of computer software that will, you know, draw fancy images for you, you can't make it. You don't end up with a proper design until you're in the space and everything's rigged, and so that's quite a thrill in terms of, like, you know, the adrenaline pumping, and you know, you've really got to be able to think on your feet, and, you know, create these things, and also, you know, as I say, I have an image in my head of what I expect it to look like, but then I'll get into the space and I might think, oh, what if I just change this a little bit or change that a little bit, and that you know, that element of play and trying to make it as good as you possibly can in that kind of very short time scale is quite exciting. I find
time
that
limited
really exciting.
nature of theatre is very, you know, it is very interesting and very different for actors as well. You know, there isn't that second take. There isn't that, you know. It's every performance is unique.
I find it with film as well. I find it really strange when they do lots of different takes, and, you know, there's lots of setup time, and I mean, another quite a technical difference about film is kind of the amount of time that you get to work on it, and, you know, the amount of resource that you can use, and you can take the same lights and reuse them on a film.
Yeah.
You know, one day they might
You're only shooting one scene at a time. Yeah.
And you just go round and round and round and do multiple takes, and then you kind of get the best one, and then suddenly you've kind of, you know, then you move on. Whereas theatre has to be, it's repeatable and it's repeated, but it's never quite the same.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Charlotte. So finally, we are going to come to our backstage binaries. These are quick fire questions. They are binary choices, as the name would suggest. And we're just looking for your first impulsive response. to these.
Okay.
And then afterwards, I'll give you an opportunity to clarify or explain one of your choices if you want to. Okay, so on stage or backstage?
Backstage.
Studio or main stage?
Probably the studio.
Act or direct?
Well, direct, I suppose.
Lighting or sound?
Lighting.
Rehearsal or performance?
Rehearsal.
Tech or dress?
Tech.
Sing or dance?
Dance.
Hair or makeup?
Makeup.
Modern or period?
Probably modern.
Comedy or tragedy?
Comedy.
Set or props?
Props.
Shakespeare or Sondheim?
Probably Shakespeare.
Okay. Is there any one of those you'd like to elaborate on?
I suppose it's generally I really enjoy the process. So I suppose the one I'm elaborating on is kind of the rehearsal
versus
performance, but also the studio one kind of comes into it because there's more experimental theatre happens in the studio.
In the studio space,
which is more interesting to me.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
You're very welcome.
We very much look forward to seeing and being in the dark.
Yes.
in places, seeing the different shades of darkness.
Yes.
In the Duchess of Malfi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including the Duchess of Malfi, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media. And please, if you've got something to say, get in touch. We would love to hear from you.
Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production, presented by John O'Neill, Liz Plumpton and Luke Plimmer, research done by Liz Plumpton and John O'Neill, edited by Kevin Middleton, and the title music was composed by Brendan Stanley.